Thank you, Ahmed. Hello, everybody. When Ahmed sort of first put the hard word on me to do something for Affinity, the original concept that came to my mind was a consequence of two trips I took last year. One was to Uzbekistan and the other was to Burma. And I thought, given the creativity of sociologists, I should be able to put something together that actually links these two apparently extraordinarily dissimilar places. And the concept that came to mind was the concept of the abandoned colony. Because as I sort of wandered around in each of these countries, very much as a tourist, not as an investigator or anything else, it became fairly clear to me that the kick-off, as it were, in each case was not dissimilar. Both countries were the creation of large imperial powers. In the one case, Great Britain. In the other case, Tsarist Russia and then later the Soviet Union. The imperial moment ended fairly rapidly and with very little planning in both cases. In the case of Uzbekistan, there was literally a phone call from Moscow to the head of the Uzbek Communist Party one evening saying, "Mate, you're on your own. We just got rid of the Soviet Union." The president, or the general secretary of the party, decided the next day that he'd become president of this new country, and he had to deal with whatever the borders and boundaries were that Stalinist theories of national minorities had put in place, and they're still dealing with the consequence of that. Burma, as people probably know, was a British colony for many years, quite a tumultuous one with a lot of conflict and tension. And when the British were negotiating the withdrawal from India, they also got caught up in a withdrawal from Burma, which they left fairly hurriedly without any real investment, if you like, in the post-colonial moment that they were about to create. And many Burmese historians would argue that the problems that we face today in Myanmar are directly consequential on two factors. One, the country that was created, in a sense, as the sort of cutout that the British had sitting between India, China, Thailand, and French Indochina, on the one hand, and the complexity and diversity of what is, after all, the most ethnically diverse country in Asia, with many tensions and many issues which you're all well aware of from the public reporting, if not from your own direct experience. So what I want to do is go at fairly high speed through this presentation. Try not to give you a fairly boring history lesson. Whoops. Just like power cord, if I'm unplugged, I stop talking. Okay. Not to give you a detailed history lesson, but to try and touch on some of the key historical moments and then focus in the second half of the talk, or middle part of the talk, on some of the critical issues that are currently evident in Myanmar, and then reflect a bit on Australia's experience of cultural diversity and what heroically or stupidly, I might suggest, could be gained from reviewing the one against the other. The opening image, I don't know how clearly you can see it there, is one of my favourite photographs from Yangon. It's I saw it hazily through a market street not far from the Central Market, and I saw this great KFC sign there, where KFC, as we know, Kentucky Fried Chicken, is probably the most, after McDonald's, the most redolent imperial symbol of American culinary power that we could possibly get. And I'm particularly taken by the fact that this particular KFC is Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is something else altogether, and actually very much tastier than the okay. So let me see whether I can make all this work. this is wonderful, except why is not the technology? I know what I need to do. This is really boring. Hang on 1 second. This is why you should always check your technology first. No, it's not. That could then be. The problem is it's working, so it's not okay. So let's put that back in. Great. Okay, now let's see how we go. Brilliant. Okay. So let's begin by exploring some of the key issues then that I want to frame what I want to say. How can Australia's experience in building a multicultural society provide any benefits from Myanmar, given the extreme sensitivity, and rightly so, of former colonial societies from any sort of advice from outside the country? So I'm doing this with hopefully with a degree of humility and not with any sense of lecturing to anyone else. As we'll discover, one of the central tropes, or one of the central ideas that has challenged governments in Myanmar since the end of colonialism has been the question of national unity. It has been the rationale for, the driving force for, the argument for nearly every decision, every change in government, every introduction of a military regime, and so on. National unity has been a driving force because of, as we'll see, the many factors that could easily disintegrate the country. And Australia's had to go through something like that around the issue of when we went from replacing white Australia with multicultural Australia. We made some decisions about, if you like, diversifying our population, and we had to come to grips with that during that period. Secondly is this question of national cohesion, that we need to be able to tell, as Australia has tried to do, an inclusive national narrative. And one of the big challenges that Australia had to face was to try and ensure that, if you like, the class system and the ethnic system didn't reinforce each other. That is, that economic differences didn't get played out in racial or ethnic terms. And most of the time we've managed to do that, but not all the time. Right? And the places where we've failed are actually probably more instructive than the places where we've been successful. The third area, which has been critical in the Australian context and has, if you like, minimised conflict and ethnic tensions in Australia, has been the introduction, the focus of governments on employment opportunity and the realisation that the way you give people a stake in the national story is to give them a stake in the national economy. And we've made various attempts to do that from time to time. And finally, the critical area of health and welfare, that we've understood from a very early stage, from the late 19th century in Australia, that affordable and accessible schooling in the national language is one of the most critical issues that we have to come to grips with. And in an ethnically diverse society, the question of where community languages and the national language fit into each other is one of the things to be resolved. We haven't done that necessarily all that well in Australia, as we've seen with the sort of roller coaster ride we've had in relationship to the learning of languages other than English. And we've also made a very clear commitment to basic health care, prevention and nutrition as part of our strategy for nation building. And I think each of those carries lessons, things that have been successful, things that have been unsuccessful, that might be relevant in other situations. So let me just set this up for you. For those of you who aren't from Burma or Myanmar, and many of you can see up, these are two maps. So this whole presentation will be on the web. I'll give the contact, the URL to own it later on, so you can go and play with this yourself. You'll see that in the map on the left shows the diversity of the national community. There's something like 135 different language groups, many national groups, many subnational groups, and so on. The Burma people, after whom Burma was named by the British, make up something like 65% of the population. So they're a majority, but not a large majority. The other national groupings make up some 35%. About 85% of the population is deemed to be Buddhist. About 5% Muslim, though that's an argued issue. There hasn't been a census for some time, and many Muslim advocates would suggest that the Muslim population is actually significantly higher than that. It's affected particularly by who you count as being Burmese, and that I want to talk about a bit later on. And then there's the Christian groups, most of whom are from the nationalities, from the national groups around the edge of Burma, because during the British period, the British were particularly positive towards national minorities, particularly negative towards the Burmans, the Burma people, and Christianity was seen as one way of aligning oneself with the colonial power against the remnants of the old regime, which had been seeking to control some of these highland areas. And the map on the right, which you won't be able to see at all, is really an indication of where the various national groupings are and the key locations for each of the states and regions. And that, if it worked, which I'm not going to try and get it to do, is a link through to the BBC site, which gives you actually a chronology of the history of Burma, Myanmar, from the perspective of Western Liberal Democrats. I want to say there are many key issues that never appear on that timeline, and many issues which are particularly fascinating for people in London and New York and Sydney, which are less important in the situation if you happen to be in Myanmar itself. Okay, here I just thought I'd throw in some pictures because I went there. So I'm going to throw in some pictures because I went there. Again, these images are possibly not going to look terribly good on that screen, but I'll just run through them quickly. That's the mosque, the main mosque in Yangon. Next door to that is the school that burnt down a week or so ago, killing those children inside it. There is a woman outside the mosque guarding the shoes on the pavement for the people inside the rain. Up here you see a Buddhist temple near Mandalay, which is a snake worship Naga temple, and has connections with Naga worship or Naga rituals all across that part of Asia. Here you have a Karen woman, probably from the Christian part of the Karen group. Here we have something which I found absolutely fascinating, which is a Nat ceremony, a dancer from a Nat ceremony near Inle Lake in the Shan States. The Nats are some, I think, 2,000 sort of mini spirit type people things, sort of cross between animism and Buddhism. Often they're images of famous heroes or people, some of whom are actually ex-Muslim heroes who have become taken into the local liturgy as Buddhist Nats. And this is a Nat ceremony, which is a sort of transvestite dance to celebrate particular Nats, where people give money to the Nat dancers in order to raise their merit. This is an image of a mosque in North Main, not far from the pagoda